Lina Harper thought she married a billionaire dream, but Zaid Al-Khalifa turned her honeymoon into a deadly punishment for a secret she couldn't erase. Lina Harper never pictured herself living a life dripping with diamonds and helicopter rides over city skylines, but when Zaid Al-Khalifa, a ridiculously wealthy Dubai billionaire with a reputation for being untouchable, slid into her social media like he'd been waiting for her his whole life, she got hooked instantly on the attention, the mystery, and the opportunity to escape her boring past. So she ignored every warning sign wrapped in gold. He flew her first class to a rooftop dinner in Dubai where the entire city sparkled beneath them like his personal jewelry box. And he acted like he was doing her a favor just by letting her sit across from him. Yet she felt special, chosen, like she'd finally upgraded into the world she always stalked online. Zaid loved showing her off, calling her his future queen without ever checking if she was ready for the throne. And Lina soaked up every second because the VIP clubs, private islands, and anything you want is yours energy felt like winning the universe. However, behind the tailored suits and expensive watches lived a man obsessed with control. A man who saw women as trophies meant to display his power. And Lina didn't notice how he always needed to know her location. How his bodyguard, Rashid, lurked like a shadow taking notes on everything she did. How Zaid would smile when she looked scared, like it fed him. Her best friend, Maya, kept telling her that relationships that look too perfect always come with fine print. But Lina didn't want to hear negativity when she was finally living like someone who mattered. Plus, Zaid promised a wedding the world would envy, a life where she would never feel small again. So she ignored her gut screaming that fairy tales don't come from billionaires who think they own the sky. And she let herself fall right into a dream that was actually a trap built just for her. Lina packed her bags like she was stepping into the pages of a luxury magazine, tossing in sparkling gowns and designer heels. But what weighed the most wasn't inside the luggage at all. It was the secret she hoped would stay dead forever. A secret that didn't fit the billionaire's fantasy. Because Zaid believed a wife was supposed to be untouched, flawless, and ready to be owned like one more addition to his gold-plated collection. Yet Lina wasn't that girl and never had been. And the fear of him finding out kept her heart racing, even while she enjoyed the perks of private jets and penthouse suites, pretending she was good enough for a man who measured perfection like stock value. And while she tried to smile through the pressure, she noticed how Rashid, the silent bodyguard who always stood close, watched her with the eyes of someone gathering evidence, tapping at his phone like he was reporting her every breath back to the man signing his paychecks. Maya, being the only person who knew the truth, begged Lina to slow down because Zaid's obsession smelled like danger and ownership instead of love. But Lina brushed it off since the money was loud and the warnings soft, convincing herself that once she walked down that aisle, everything would magically fall into place. Even though every night her brain screamed that people like Zaid don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are, and she could feel the walls starting to close in when he began asking invasive questions about her past, hunting for cracks in her story like a predator studying prey. And even when she laughed off his suspicions, the coldness in his stare said he already suspected something wasn't pure in the perfect bride he paid the world to adore. Yet she told herself that love or something like it would be enough to keep the secret buried, unaware that Zaid had already released his shadow to dig up the truth that would soon destroy her. The wedding was a spectacle built for headlines and envy, transforming Dubai into a stage where Lina pretended to be the happiest bride alive while drowning in anxiety, because the moment she stepped into that venue dripping in diamonds and fear, she realized she wasn't marrying a man. She was marrying a brand, and every detail screamed wealth louder than love. Gold petals falling from the ceiling, influencers live-streaming every breath she took, a 10-tier cake taller than some mansions, Zaid acting like a king collecting his latest achievement while thousands watched, thinking they were witnessing a modern fairy tale. And Lina forced her smile wider each time a camera pointed her way so no one would see the panic behind her eyes, especially when she noticed Zaid walking around like he owned the air and expected everyone to bow for breathing it. And Rashid stayed glued to her side like a guard dog, more focused on her than protecting the billionaire, making sure she didn't slip away for even a second. Meanwhile, Maya sat in the front row gripping her phone like a lifeline, knowing her best friend wasn't ready for this royal cage, wishing she could rip Lina out before the vows locked her into a nightmare she couldn't return from. But Lina convinced herself that if she played the perfect bride long enough, maybe Zaid would finally relax. Maybe his obsession with purity and status would fade once they were officially husband and wife. Yet she could feel him drifting into a darker mood with every toast and every flash of the cameras. Because somewhere behind his forced grin, he was hiding something. A storm waiting for the moment the world turned its back. And she didn't realize that while she walked the aisle in luxury worth millions, somewhere in a private room on that same night, a man Zaid had hired was sending him the final confirmation that the woman he married didn't fit the fantasy he demanded, turning the fairy tale into a countdown to violence she never saw coming. The honeymoon should have been the payoff for surviving the wild wedding, a paradise escape where Lina could finally breathe without an audience watching. As Zaid whisked her off to a private island in the Maldives with water so blue it looked fake, and luxury villas floating above the ocean like dreams come to life. But the moment they landed, everything shifted. Zaid barely looked at her, his vibe colder than the marble floors beneath their feet. And Rashid kept receiving messages that made him tighten his jaw while shooting Lina those creepy side glances like she was already guilty of something. Lina tried to blame it on stress, thinking maybe Zaid was exhausted from the attention overload and wedding chaos. But deep down, she felt his patience fading like a flame running out of air. And every second she spent near him felt like being evaluated by a judge who already made up his mind. While the romantic fantasy she chased slipped right through her fingers, replaced by a silence that felt like punishment. And it all made sense when she remembered the invasive questions about her past, the sudden change in his mood weeks before the wedding, the way Rashid tracked her every move, because Zaid wasn't celebrating. He was investigating, having hired a private detective months earlier to dig up her entire life, determined to confirm that his bride met his twisted ideal of perfection. When that investigator exposed the secret she prayed would never see light again, everything Zaid thought he owned shattered into rage, feeding the bruised ego of a man who thought reputation mattered more than reality. So instead of enjoying the tropical breeze, Lina walked on eggshells in paradise, feeling like a prisoner in silk. And she knew something terrible was coming when Zaid finally stared at her with a look that promised payback. A look that said he didn't cross oceans for love. He crossed them to punish a lie he believed ruined his pride forever. Zaid's rage didn't explode with loud warnings or slammed doors. It simmered into something scarier, the kind of quiet fury that stalks before it strikes. And Lina felt every second of it creeping up her spine as she stood in that luxury villa decorated for love but soaked in tension, realizing the honeymoon was a trap disguised as paradise. Zaid stared at her like she was a defective purchase he needed to return. His pride shattered because the picture-perfect virgin bride he bragged about to the world wasn't real, and in his twisted mind she ruined his honor, making him look weak in front of a world that worshipped him. So he let that humiliation turn into violence, stripping away the glamorous fantasy she chased. And Rashid stood by the locked door like a guard protecting the monster instead of the victim, all while the ocean outside crashed against the stilts of the villa like nature trying to warn someone, anyone, to stop what was about to happen. Lina tried to reach for any escape, any lie that could save her. But Zaid wasn't listening. He was acting like a judge, jury and executioner of his wounded ego, unleashing torment that came from entitlement and rage, not love. And each moment dragged on like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from, with the sound of her heartbeat drowning out every thought except survival. She fought back because she wasn't the fragile doll he imagined. But defending herself only made him angrier, convinced that resistance proved her guilt. And as the night stretched into cruel hours, her body and spirit broke under the weight of his brutality until Lina's strength slipped away just before dawn, leaving the once beautiful honeymoon suite transformed into a silent crime scene, the last place she ever expected to die. While Zaid stood over the destruction he caused, breathing heavy, like he believed he'd restored his twisted version of honor. Completely convinced he hadn't murdered his wife, he'd corrected a mistake. Zaid woke up the next morning acting like nothing had happened, sliding right back into his billionaire arrogance as if he hadn't just destroyed the woman he swore to cherish. And instead of panic or guilt, he focused on cleanup, calling his financial team before breakfast, because in his world, money fixed everything, even murder. So while Lina's lifeless body lay twisted beside the bed like discarded baggage, he calmly ordered Rashid to make the problem disappear. And Rashid, trained to obey without question, wrapped Lina up and carried her out into the early sunlight like she was just luggage being moved, tossing her into the ocean with the same casualness he'd used to throw away trash, believing the waves would swallow the evidence forever. Then helped Zaid rehearse his grieving widower act, prepping statements about how Lina slipped during a romantic swim, a tragic accident that would earn global sympathy for the heartbroken billionaire who lost everything. Headlines rushed in fast, splashing his face across TV screens and social feeds as the devastated husband crying behind sunglasses worth more than most people's cars. But while the world fell for his performance, Maya didn't. Because she knew Lina too well to believe she drowned on honeymoon day one, so she kept her eyes locked on the cracks forming in Zaid's perfect story, gathering receipts, screenshots of Lina's terrified texts, notes about his controlling behavior, screenshots of deleted accounts, and she wasn't afraid to drag a billionaire into the spotlight for justice. She delivered everything to Detective Samir Khan, a sharp, stubborn investigator who refused to let status rewrite the truth, and he immediately noticed that Zaid's story sounded too polished, too rehearsed, and the forensic report didn't match the water accident lie, revealing bruises that weren't caused by waves or coral, but by fists and rage. Zaid threw cash around like confetti to bury the truth, making calls to powerful people who owed him favors. But this time, money couldn't cover up the trail of violence he left behind, because the one person he underestimated, Lina's loyal friend, had already turned grief into a weapon, strong enough to bring his empire crashing down. Detective Samir Khan refused to let a billionaire rewrite reality, so he dug into every detail of Lina's death, following the evidence like a blood trail leading straight back to Zaid. And while the billionaire strutted around claiming heartbreak, police quietly reopened the case, dragging divers into the sea until they found Lina's body washed up near coral, bruised and battered in ways no ocean could explain. The autopsy exposing a timeline that didn't match Zaid's polished interview lies, forcing Rashid into an interrogation room where his loyalty cracked under pressure, fear swallowing the power money once gave him as he spilled the truth piece by piece, describing the rage, the control, the brutal final hours Lina endured while paradise turned into a cage. And Samir used that confession to tear apart Zaid's fake narrative, presenting charges that wiped the smirk off his arrogant face. But even then, Zaid tried to buy freedom like another luxury purchase, calling lawyers who bragged about beating every rap he ever faced, offering fortunes to silence the justice system, until he realized influence doesn't erase fingerprints or revive the dead. And the courtroom turned into the only place he couldn't manipulate his image. Judges and jurors glaring at the monster behind the billionaire mask, sentencing him to life inside a high-security prison where no one cared about his bank account or name, leaving him to rot in a cell that smelled like the karma he earned, while the media that once worshipped him now painted him as a monster who destroyed a woman because she didn't fit his delusional standards. And Maya stood outside the courthouse with shaking hands, grieving but proud that she helped expose the truth, knowing Lina's voice still spoke through the evidence that brought justice, while Detective Khan closed the case, reminding everyone that even in a world where cash controls everything, the truth doesn't drown forever. And sometimes the most powerful men fall the hardest when the lies they built their kingdom on finally collapse.